You can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine. Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're our king. Ooh yeah. Ooh yeah.
Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen. I created the show about 3 years ago. I'm recording this February 12th, and it's 2025 right now, and it was back in February of 2022 that I first put out the trailer for this Cannabis Man podcast. I'm a broadcaster in Chicago, and I've been in media for the last almost 15 years now, and I have had the pleasure and privilege of working on many podcasts over the years. But when cannabis was legalized here in Illinois, recreationally in 2020, medically back in 2013 and 14, and so on, and I've been a personal cannabis user, by the way, for about 20 years now, since I was in my late teens and early 20s. That's when I first started using the plant. I kept it a part of my life as somebody who always struggled getting to sleep at night, and I found that cannabis helped me a lot with that. And so when it became recreationally legal here, and more people started exploring it and were going to be interested in it and information about it because of that legal change, I, as a member of various newsrooms around the state and the city of Chicago, I was excited to bring those conversations, that context and that information to people who were seeking it about cannabis, who were going to be. And I kept waiting for those conversations to materialize in those newsrooms, in those legacy media channels and on those platforms. And even today, in February of 2025, that has still not materialized. A lot of these legacy media companies, a lot of these channels on which people rely for their news, their info, their context, they are still afraid to touch cannabis a lot of the time. It's not the case with all of them, and I think some of them try fairly to cover it to the best of their abilities, but the fact is they, like many industries, are keeping their distance until there is a change in the federal prohibition. Meanwhile, states like this one, Illinois, along with 24 other states, have recreationally legalized using the plant for those 21 and up. And it's about 38 total now in the U.S. that have legalized medically, which is laughable considering the Schedule I status of cannabis under the Controlled Substances Act means that there is no official acknowledgement of any medical benefit. Only harm is recognized by something on Schedule I. And yet, again, 38 states have legalized medically. Other countries around the world have done the same thing. So there's this tug of war going on around America and the rest of the world as to how cannabis fits in society, its benefits, its potential risks, all of this at a moment when this green frontier of areas where cannabis consumption is legal for adults over 21, that territory is expanding all the time. And so this is a longer-winded way of me telling you that is what brought about this creation of the Cannabis Man podcast. I wanted to start having conversations with experts in the space, whether those be doctors or researchers who are treating people medically with cannabis or studying the plant in their labs, answering questions we still have, whether they be politicians, elected or appointed leaders who are responsible for passing and enforcing these laws in legal cannabis states and laying the framework for what legal cannabis is looking like going forward. I'll also speak with entrepreneurs and business owners, people inventing or creating products and services in the cannabis space we'll all get to use now, as well as lawyers who are responsible for sort of litigating these different cannabis laws, and other journalists, people in the space, podcasters like myself who are endeavoring to cover this at this critical time. And in the 3 years that I created this podcast and have been hosting episodes and publishing them, it has grown into a show that is heard in 87 countries, over 1,600 cities around the world, all 50 states. and is listed in the top 10% of all global podcasts, which is officially listed somewhere around 5 million, thought to be a lot higher than that. So I'm incredibly grateful for everybody who's checked it out. If you are listening to this right now, wherever it is through YouTube, Spotify, or Apple, whichever your pod platform is, I sincerely thank you for taking a listen to this show. And if you like what I'm doing here, leave a rating or review, comment on it, throw some stars up, review the show, and share it with anybody you think might enjoy it. You can follow the show at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram, Cannabis Man Podcast Facebook page and YouTube channels. I, Don Kleppin, Kleppin, also will post on Facebook and Blue Sky and Threads and all of these other freaking platforms that we all have to keep straight now, regardless of how friendly or unfriendly those are toward cannabis topics. I have several topics to bring up to you today. As always, I'll talk about some local news and events in the news joint wrap, and then I'll expand to more national or globally focused news stories in the cannabis space. A lot of cool headlines to tell you about some interesting things going on in Ohio regarding which parts of cannabis plants they're selling. There is also a dispensary that's giving away something that I think is a great idea to medical patients there. In Montana, there's a Republican lawmaker calling for something relating to cannabis that has elicited some strong feelings, positive or negative. You be the judge of that. And then there is a story that I think you're going to love to hear. It has to do with something that archaeologists have found relating to cannabis, and it's over 2,000 years ago. A story published earlier this week, and I will share that with you later in the episode. I've also talked a lot on this show about cannabis beverages. I say a lot on this podcast that there is a unique space that beverages occupy in our society. There's a lot of substances we lean on to get into an altered state. And I don't just mean like party altered like cannabis and alcohol, but even caffeine or sugars. Creatine for people who work out or protein powders, acetaminophen, Tylenol, and Advil when you have a headache. We lean on a lot of substances and pharmaceuticals to kind of alter our state in certain ways. Alcohol has for a long time sort of held this position firmly of beverages that we consume socially, getting us into a more socially lubricated state when you're among other people, or if you're just trying to unwind at the end of the day. But beverages specifically have occupied a unique space alone for a long, long period of human history. But the reality is that younger generations, and I'm thinking of Gen Z, or some people call them iGen, whether that refers to internet or iPod, I'm not exactly sure which, but Gen Z or iGen and then Gen Alpha, those who come after millennials, which is what I am, they have a very different relationship with alcohol. And it's still kind of changing, and I think the results of research are still piecing this picture together. Some millennials feel differently about it too, and there are plenty in other age groups that have made decisions to cut out alcohol from their lives for different reasons. My point in bringing all this up is this. Society at large, Americans and people around the world, are rethinking their relationship with alcohol. There was a study recently showing that no amount of alcohol is quote-unquote safe for consumption, meaning that there is some negative health impacts from even moderate or fairly abstinent drinking. And then also recently, the new administration leading America right now, the Surgeon General, came out and suggested really, that there should be cancer warnings on alcohol products the same way there are on packages of cigarettes. All of this to say that cannabis beverages are growing and primed to explode to occupy this vacuum that is slowly growing around alcohol consumption. The barrier to entry for that is very low. I think beverages are a lot more approachable for people than lighting up even a joint, something that simple. But you throw a bong at somebody who's not familiar, or you present them with one of these dab rigs for concentrates, and just watch the whites of their eyes grow as they scramble to think of an excuse to walk away from you. It is not very approachable compared to cracking open a can for a beverage or having a bartender pour it in a glass and hand it to you. Beverages are very approachable in that regard, and standing in a circle with other people, not having to worry about if smoke is being exhaled near you, that sort of thing. I know some people, if they're looking to control more of their vibe or their buzz and that sort of thing might bother them, beverages are a way to sort of moderate your consumption with a little more control than something that you inhale when you're in a group of people. All of those things are adding up to alcohol companies looking for ways to get in to the cannabis beverage space. And what's good about that, potentially, I think, is that those alcohol companies are uniquely set up to deal with the very real and physical limitations of transporting liquids, transporting beverages, which anybody who's worked in that industry, as I did for 4 years, transporting beverages will tell you it is difficult. There are a lot of logistics to it, the shipping it around to the places you can buy it or consume it. All of that takes a lot of work and effort and coordination. And there is one such very well-known alcohol company, the Boston Beer Company, makers of Sam Adams and other products like Truly, the cider, Twisted Tea, very popular and well-known alcohol brand that's been doing it at a high level for many, many years. They are now getting into the cannabis beverage space. And they have a cannabis beverage called Teapot, tea with pot, if you like, which they do. That is available now for pretty much everybody in Canada, and they are slowly and mainly looking ahead to roll this out in American states as well. And I'm talking with the head of their cannabis department, Paul Weaver, later on, along with reviewing Teapot for you to kind of give you an idea about this new cannabis beverage that's available for you to check out anywhere right now in Canada and soon in the United States. So all of that and more coming up for you on this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast. Let's open it up for real.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis broadcast.
And now we've opened it up properly. Thanks again for checking out the Cannabis Man podcast. Really can't thank you enough for taking some time to listen. I know podcasts aren't everybody's thing, but boy, just the support, the engagement, the interest that's been shown from people around the world, wherever you are right now, whether it's in the U.S., my American brethren, if you're over the border in Canada, or across the pond over there in countries like Australia, Germany, Singapore, I see you. I see you on the locations map of listeners to this very show, and I want to thank you in particular, because it is very exciting, and I knew you were out there when I started this show, and I'm just glad we found each other. If you, as I suspect, based on your listening to this podcast, if you enjoy keeping up to date on cannabis news stories in the U.S., around the world at large, some perspective from people who have been in the space for a while, talking about specifically what's changing week to week and the various themes that are being explored, what Congress is talking about, what bills are proposed, where we sit on those, new laws, new goods, new services, all that jazz. You can also check out the Weekly Chronic, which is a newsletter that I started a few months back. That's also been going strong on Substack. It is free. I have linked it below. You can click on the Weekly Chronic in the description notes here. It'll take you to Substack, and you can just click the subscribe button, and you will get one of these Weekly Chronic newsletters emailed to your inbox every Tuesday morning. And what I do is I do a deep dive into a specific news story or a theme that the cannabis space is dealing with right now, the legal cannabis space. This week's theme, my headline was "The Green Rush is Over." Gretchen and I are both, going through Deadwood, the HBO series again, and it's a rewatch for me. It's the first time viewing for her, and if you haven't seen it, my goodness, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot. If you enjoy that enchanting period of American history, that gold rush, lot of cast that you might recognize: Timothy Olyphant, Ian McShane, Molly Parker is in there. A lot of faces you'll probably recognize whose careers were really rocket launched after the success of Deadwood. But it is a show that sort of charts a South Dakota town as it is, in like the 1860s and 70s, right as the discovery of gold underneath it was booming. And people were going to places like this, striking out west to seek their fortunes and then dig and prospect. And sometimes, they found that they had claimed land that was right on a gold mine, and then their fortunes changed overnight. It's like, winning the lotto, but just digging for a ticket. And it's really fascinating, and Ian McShane has some just wonderful swear-filled soliloquies. So if that's your thing, you really got to check out this show. But the reason I bring it up is because I notice a lot of parallels as I'm watching this with the gold rush back then and what early legal cannabis was like here in this country. We're over a decade in to these states recreationally legalizing. It's 2025 right now. Colorado and Washington went rec back in 2014, and there were states going medical long before that. So the point is, the similarities for me, the parallels come from all of the people, the throngs and the crowds of people rushing into this industry thinking that there was just gold in the streets, and they were going to come in here and scoop it up, and they were going to quickly become millionaires overnight because cannabis was, legal in their state, and they just had to kind of set up a business. And not, if you got out there early, there wasn't a ton of competition, and you were just going to kind of sprint to the finish line and retire early. We have seen now, a decade later, that is really not what has happened. And I would say the same of the big MSOs, the giant multi-state operators too. I think that's the same for them as well. Is there a lot of profit in cannabis, or should I say, are sales of cannabis huge and growing every day, every single year, hitting 30 billion last year in the States? Yes, that is true. But it's also true that certain markets in certain states are bottoming out because of the way those states have allowed people to all get in on the party and just print licenses to the effect that eventually it was a race to the bottom for prices. This is not to say that people aren't still doing well and that there's still a lot of opportunity here. And I'm certainly not preaching doom and gloom. I do think that we are slowly but surely trundling, one of my favorite words, look it up. We are trundling toward the top. Cannabis, eventually, the momentum is still here, where recent polls show as much as 80% of Americans think cannabis should be legalized in some fashion. Politically, that is a tidal wave. You never see rates that high of people agreeing on anything in America with 370 million people. So I believe that we are headed toward some acknowledgement of the benefits of cannabis, if nothing else, rescheduling. I do think maybe we get safe banking this year. There is certainly some talk of that on Capitol Hill here. There's pushing for it. And then we still have to wait 3 months and the DEA with this rescheduling process. It's frustrating, it's annoyingly long, and there are continued road bumps, of which there will be more. But I still believe rescheduling is going to come. And with that, profit margins are going to grow, regulations will disappear, more people can get in on this party. But either way, this period of early legal cannabis where it felt like the Wild West, and as I will be referring to henceforth as the Green Rush, that is over. And we're entering this new phase of sort of survivors or veterans who have been able to navigate and weather this storm of the not immediate riches that some people anyway, thought they were going to sign up for by getting into cannabis. The people who have survived that Green Rush period and the subsequent correction, those are the people who now are going to dictate how this goes moving forward. And it's still a very, very exciting time to be a can enthusiast, a connoisseur, if you like. Somebody who's excited about this space and is looking forward to enjoying more cannabis products and experiences. So I talked about that a little bit. I dove into why, sort of how that Green Rush came about, what drove that boom, and the idea of alcohol and cannabis kind of existing in the same place, along with some other headlines. A product review, and I also share book reviews. I do what's called Lit Reads in every issue of the Weekly Chronic, and I reviewed a book that I read a while back called The Expectation Effect. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, like I said, you can sign up for the Weekly Chronic by clicking the link below. Now let's kick into the News Joint Wrap. This is a wrap-up of news stories and events and reviews, all curated for you by IllinoisNewsJoint.com. And I want to start with something that I have been really looking forward to in the Illinois market, and I feel like we have been so behind on this, so I was so excited that Jason Brown of the News Joint printed this article earlier this week. Legislators in Illinois introduced 3 cannabis delivery bills. So exciting. I am so tired of, I don't know if you're in the Chicago area, if you're in Illinois, but we got like 4 or 5 inches of snow just earlier today on the 12th from when I'm recording this. And the whole thought of getting outside and going to a dispensary and trudging through this nastiness just to get yourself a cannabis product.
That's enough.
It is so enough, Snoop, that we haven't been able to order delivery here in Illinois. And
that's enough.
Clearly the legislators felt the same way. It is time to address this issue, which is long overdue. But all these bills have to do with delivery, drive-through, security, and age verification, basically laying the groundwork for cannabis product delivery and drive-throughs at dispensaries. Something that, as I just said, has been long overdue. So it's exciting to know that the legislators in Springfield are actually moving this forward. There's another bill that's been proposed that would increase cannabis plant limits for medical patients. This is something that I've been on from the beginning. This is something that Illinois News Joint has been on from the beginning, covering the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Program Act. This bill, House Bill 3498, introduced by Representative Rita Mayfield, would raise the legal cannabis plant limit from 5 to 12. So that is obviously a major advancement there. And then one final bill here, a couple of them, another article from Jason Brown, also very exciting because of what it heralds. The bills would create On-Premise Cannabis Consumption Act. Now, I have been attending cannabis consumption events for years. They are mostly fabulous. But as Jason notes in this article, they're not without obstacles because with the regulations and depending on where they can be held, a lot of jurisdictions don't even allow for open consumption. You can get, sometimes depending on where these events are held, sometimes you can get permits. But as anybody who tries to plan these events will tell you, trying to get together a bunch of people and give them the right, the freedom to consume alcohol and cannabis in the same venue, that is fraught with red tape. And it results in so many headaches for the people who are trying to put these events together. So this bill from the Illinois General Assembly was introduced in each chamber, and it could help alleviate some of those open consumption obstacles. This is House Bill 3513, introduced by Representative Justin Slaughter, Senate Bill 1772, introduced by Senator Kimberly Lightford, and House Bill 3061 by Sonia M. Harper. And this would allow a cannabis hospitality venue, which they identify as a public or private restaurant, bar, or other licensed business, which allows communal consumption of cannabis or cannabis-infused products on premises. And these are licenses for temporary events. So I have talked a lot about cannabis events, and I'll mention one here in a moment. If you haven't had a chance to get to some of these, and that's understandable because of how limited they've been and all the headaches that go into setting them up, this should be very exciting for you because I think at the earliest opportunity for you, at your earliest convenience, you should take it upon yourself to get to an open consumption cannabis event. Because truly, if you haven't been, it is like a new world. It is a glimpse into what the future of socializing could hold. And I'm not talking about smoke-filled rooms. There is an event coming up next week on a rooftop, and you're up there with lots of great people, lots of good food, fun vibes, have a cocktail in one hand and a burning joint in the other, and it's all legal, regulated, high-quality cannabis. And you get to party like the old days, but everything's on the up and up. It is really a wonderful and exciting time. And the fact that these bills are moving Illinois forward in these big, big ways, I think all of us here should be very excited. And you should also be excited if you are single, looking for a cannabis event where you might be able to meet that special someone. Stoner Speed Dating. This is an event coming up February 20th. This is next week from when this comes out. Located at the Made Gallery on Grand Avenue. second floor in Chicago. Latest edition of Stoner Speed Dating, running from 7 to 9 p.m. Thursday, the 20th. You can buy tickets at the IllinoisNewsJoint.com link below. I will not be there, not only because I'm happily married, but also because as much as I love the Stoner Speed Dating vibe, I think that it really adds a much-needed icebreaker to a pretty tense and awkward event there. But as much as I enjoy those things, I will be attending a different event, February 20th. This is an industry event for cannabis professionals and those, and a local company, Atomic Acres, is putting this on. They have some very exciting products, and there'll be food and drinks and lots of great people there. So I am very, very excited to be at that event. I will tell you all about it next week on the podcast. But for now, you can find out more information about all I mentioned there at IllinoisNewsJoint.com. But now I want to get into my product of the week, and I've got a couple to tell you about. The first one, I'm going to talk about a vape pen from Sauce Essentials. This is a company that I've interviewed and will be publishing that interview in the next couple of weeks here. But the first day that I returned from my abstinence from cannabis, February 1st, after dry January, I told you about the Blue Dream pre-roll that I indulged in, but Sauce Essentials was kind enough to send me a sort of lunchbox filled with goodies. It was one of the best cannabis packages I've ever gotten. It truly looks like one of the old school lunch boxes that you would bring to the cafeteria and you'd unlock, and your sandwich and your thermos is in there, maybe a Lunchable if you were really lucky, or a Capri Sun, one of those things. Crack this thing open. It's got sauce all over the front of it. The logo, I mean, Sauce Essentials. And there were pre-rolls in there. There's a gummy I still haven't tried, and there were 2 vape pens. I want to tell you about their Sativa Super Sour Diesel. Now, I'm sharing a picture along with this episode of this pen, but I gotta say, the design of this was a very easy pull. I love the color scheme. It's kind of a creamsicle orange at the base that fades to yellow and then white as the pen rolls up toward the mouthpiece. I have been casually using this pen since the 1st, and I'm recording this on the 12th. So this is 12 days in, and this cart is still more than half full. And I want to talk about the flavor. It definitely has that sour diesel citrus bite. Something I have really come to rely on when I get anything that says sour diesel. This live resin cart does a lot to preserve that flavor profile. It's a smooth exhale. You feel it, not as intensely in the lungs, the bite as like a combustible, like a joint or something, but you definitely feel it. You get the good taste. And in just a few minutes, I feel the uplifting effects of the sativa. This is not like a jittery caffeinated sativa. It's not a huge boost, which is why I'm recording this right now in the evening and I'm still hitting this. I happily hit this until maybe 8 or 9 at night, at which point I'll switch over to an indica pen and just kind of start winding down. But I have really been loving this super sour diesel pen from Sauce Essentials. The visual look is great. It's rechargeable. You can plug it into one of those headphone chargers. It's kind of like a rounded one. You'll see on the picture, or if you go to the website, you can check this out. But it's got a nice silicone cap that goes over the top of it, as well as a cap that plugs off the adapter port to charge it. Both holes on each end are blocked by these pieces, so the mouthpiece never gets dirty. You never have to worry about anything, getting in or out of the charging port. It's well designed, it tastes great, and I love the vibe of it is basically what I'm saying. So check out Sauce Essentials if you're looking for a vape pen that you haven't tried and you enjoyed. But aside from the inhalables in terms of products here, and I just had to take another pull of that sour diesel, really, really tasty. What's your favorite flavor profile in terms of cannabis products too? What's your top terp? What's your terpene that you're vibing with? The more I've looked into these, I find that limonene, caryophyllene, myrcene are ones that tend to get me feeling the way I want to feel. But in terms of taste, I feel like it's limonene, and then there's linalool as well. Both I really, really like. Pinenes are a little more foresty, I have found. Minty, sometimes that's nice. But this vibe, the limonene, the citrusy kind of taste, I'll be satisfied with those all day. I'll also be satisfied all day with a quality cannabis beverage. And I've got one of those right here in my hand. And it's made by the company for which my guest this week does great work. And that would be the Boston Beer Company, and this product would be Teapot, the cannabis-infused beverage that I speak with Paul Weaver, my guest, about after this segment. The conversation will be starting shortly, but I want to tell you my thoughts about Teapot. This is the lemon black tea version, the Noir Citron edition. Citron, perhaps? The logo, I've shared a picture of this, and I will with the episode. The logo is a black teapot with the white letters of Teapot written on the little picture of it. And out of the spout is coming a cannabis leaf. Still black like the teapot, and it says "Good Day Iced Tea." Now, this sample that they sent me, and I appreciate that, Paul and the Boston Beer Company, this is non-infused because, again, they're operating in Canada. Boston Beer Company is a huge company, so they're doing everything by the book, and they are waiting, as you'll hear Paul say, they are waiting to do business in America for some signals from the federal government that regulations will change. I think rescheduling would go a long way toward getting some Teapot on dispensary shelves or liquor store shelves, which I'm telling you, I'm definitely waiting for. So I'm not reviewing this based on the buzz because I haven't tried it with a THC buzz or with any cannabinoids in them. However, I will tell you about how refreshing it is and the taste. Cheers. Oh, man. You know, I took the first drink there, and it just goes down so smooth, and I'm thirsty. You know, it gets hot in these recording booths. I don't know if you know that, but there's, acoustic material all over this room here, and I can't turn the fan on, otherwise the mic will pick it up. So the longer I go recording, the thirstier I get, and this really reminds me of the old Brisk iced teas. You ever have those? I had Arizona. I've done all the major brands and all that. The Arizona ones are pretty good too, a little sweet for my taste, but this specifically reminds me of like the taste of Brisk. And man, when I was younger, I would just murder those on a summer day. I mean, those were so tasty, so refreshing, and that is really what I feel from this Teapot beverage as well. I just took down almost half of it on the first go-round. It does have sweetness. As I said, not as sweet as like Arizona, but there is a mild squeezing of the tongue from the sides, the way that sugary drinks can kind of get. Doesn't really dry it out, but there is some of that. The main taste that comes off the top is the lemon. You get a nice, it's not fully tart, but it's a tart sweetness, or a sweet tartness, perhaps. Take your pick. But either way, the taste is refreshing, lemony, and it doesn't leave much of an impression behind. When I said squeezing of the tongue, very mild, and, now about a minute or so later, it really disappears with only the faintest hint of lemon kind of on the back of your tongue, in the back of the throat. And you kind of want to go back for another. So cheers. It's very good. My one gripe with it is that there is a little more sugar than I'd like. 23 grams of sugars in this can. 100 calories. The 25 grams of carbs are mainly from the sugar. Very minor amount of sodium. No sodium. There's a little potassium in here, 5% for the day, and a little calcium, 1% for your daily value. But 100 calories, and you get the 23 grams of sugars. That would be something I wouldn't mind seeing that number ramped down a little bit. I think that, we get a lot of sugar in our day-to-day lives. The FDA, the people in charge of telling us what's normal or the acceptable amount to consume in a day, I think it's way too high. And I just think in general, I would prefer to see a drink with like fewer than 10 grams of sugar. And God knows there are seltzers and there are other cannabis drinks who are doing exactly that. Some of them are sugar-free and they taste good. So I think a company as big as Boston Beer, they talked about, me and Paul, you'll hear in a moment, Paul talks about some of the other flavors they have, some other varieties of Teapot. And they sound fantastic. I think the direction they're going in is great. One suggestion I would make would be, let's go with a low sugar or sugar-free option. See what Boston Beer Company can come up with in that regard. And I would be happy to try that thing. But in the meantime, you can do a lot worse than this lemon black tea flavor of Teapot. And it is very refreshing and lemony. So nice drink. You could do a lot worse than this, not soda. 23 grams of sugar isn't the end of the world. But like I said, the one thing I would change would be a little bit less sugar, but it's still a pretty good drink. I think you could do worse than this. And now hear more about Teapot along with Boston Beer Company, their other products, which include CBD options with no THC. Find out where you can buy Teapot. Again, if you're in Canada, you already have access. We also discuss if their product is hemp-based. We cover kind of some of the intricacies of the 2018 Farm Bill and hemp versus cannabis. We talk about alcohol companies being uniquely positioned to handle distribution of cannabis beverages well. And we end our conversation talking about Paul's belief in their products at Boston Beer and how they're in this for the long haul, knowing that the success of some of their other brands took a little bit longer to achieve than maybe they would have thought early on. So enjoy this conversation with my guest this week. Listener, welcome back. I'm very excited to speak with my guest today. You know that I've brought up on the show many times about the various exciting elements to legal cannabis. There's a lot about the industry to be excited about, and I don't think that there is an industry as exciting as this one, this green frontier that we're all a part of and kind of watching expand day by day. And it's not just the legal flower. It's not just the regular old smoking of cannabis that people have been familiar with so long that is exciting about this. It is a lot of the innovations in other product spaces. And by that, I'm bringing up something that I've talked about on the show a lot, which is cannabis beverages. There is a long-standing tradition socially in our society where people gather, share a meal, and especially share beverages, and it just sort of acts as a social lubricant where people are sharing an experience, having conversations, enjoying each other's company, and it really tends to fill a void of connectivity that we have living day to day on planet Earth here. And for a long time, alcohol was pretty much the sole enjoyer of being that social lubricant. It was the main substance that we all leaned on to sort of be in those beverages that acted as the thing that made people feel a little more comfortable, let the tongues hang a little looser, and just sort of painted the vibes in such a way that it kept people coming back for more, and whether that's at a bar or a backyard barbecue or wherever, alcohol was pretty much the thing that we turned to in those moments. Well, now that legal cannabis is expanding as much as it is, there are some very exciting cannabis beverages that are available for purchase depending on where you are, whether you're in the U.S. or Canada or countries around the world which have legalized cannabis, and the states in the U.S. which have done so as well. And those cannabis beverages are really starting to come out with some exciting innovations, not just in flavors, but in, seltzers, in teas, in the overall drinking experience, as well then as the buzz that you feel afterward from the cannabis. And my guest today has one such product just like that, has innovated one in the Boston area, and it's branched off of an alcohol company. This is from the Boston Beer Company, and so they've been doing alcohol well at a high level for a long, long time. But 2 years ago in 2022, my guest branched out and launched Teapot, the first cannabis tea drink, iced tea. And it comes in various varieties, and there are a lot of different, fun, exciting opportunities to work this into social events. Cannabis and tea go very well together. Iced tea in the summertime, even, in the fall, while it's been getting a little bit warm here. I don't know where you are, listener, but in Chicago, it feels more like summer today. It's about 80 degrees, so iced tea sounds absolutely fabulous. And so here to talk about Teapot, as well as the rise of hemp-derived CBD and THC beverages and why alcohol companies might be getting into this, is the director and head of cannabis at the Boston Beer Company, Paul Weaver. Welcome, Paul. Thanks for coming on today.
Don, thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind introduction. Boston Beer Company is best known as the makers of Sam Adams beer.
Of course.
So that's probably what your listeners might know us best for. But we also make other brands like Twisted Tea and Angry Orchard Cider and Truly Hard Seltzer. And a couple of years ago, we created Teapot, a line of cannabis-infused iced teas, low-dose, non-carbonated cannabis iced teas that are designed to kind of normalize cannabis and bring it to a much more normal setting, like you mentioned, kind of like your barbecues and your backyard hangouts with your friends and your family. So it's been a pretty cool experience to take an American institution like Sam Adams and extend it into cannabis.
Tell us a little about yourself and your journey. What brought you here? And have you worked in cannabis before, or was it kind of coming up through alcohol?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started first in the beer industry. I started working for another brewer called Molson Coors, and I worked in Molson Coors up here in their Toronto brewery for about 7 years doing product innovation and new beer launches, and learned to love the beer industry. And in 2016, 2017, it was pretty clear that Canada was going to be legalizing cannabis at the federal level. The writing was on the wall, and I had a chance to go work with a large cannabis company here in Canada called Canopy Growth Corporation. So I worked as the head of innovation at Canopy Growth Corporation, doing edibles and a few other form factors, and got the cannabis bug, as I'm sure you have.
Yes, sir.
And really, found cannabis to be a force for good in the world. Very misunderstood and heavily stigmatized, but I did learn to fall in love with the concept of cannabis beverages and the idea of normalizing cannabis consumption, offering comparable alternatives to alcohol, and figuring it out. Then I met the guys at Boston Beer Company, Jim Cook, and the leadership team at Boston Beer, and we set up this cannabis subsidiary to develop the best-in-class cannabis drinks we could. And so far, so good. Yeah, and it's been really amazing to see what we can accomplish when you apply the resources of Boston Beer to an experienced group of cannabis professionals like my team.
I talk a lot on the show about the role that beverages place in society. I mentioned in the intro about how, kind of deeply we've relied on them. Even back when we were like nomadic tribes, people would sit around a fire and brew beer or wine or whatever they could and would kind of share it with each other. So that social lubricant is really baked deeply into our social DNA. And when you talk about normalizing it, I think that and I've talked about this on the show too, like that there's a notion of when you smoke it, it floats through the air. People do worry about secondhand, if you're a fan of the smell, if you're not. Cannabis beverages, really, that to me seems like the key to truly moving this normalization journey forward, Well,
it's funny. When I first, just to address this notion of the human story, the history of humans and the role of alcohol, like Mesopotamia and beer,
Yeah.
There's something kind of mysterious about the human history of cannabis. Like, we broke the stone tablets at some point, and we don't quite know where it fit into kind of the story of human evolution. But genetically, we know that our bodies have endocannabinoid receptors. So we've genetically evolved with cannabis. Our bodies are meant to experience cannabis and cannabinoids. So it's kind of interesting to think about kind of the fantasy story of beer and the evolution of the first drinks being made, but where does cannabis sit in the history of man and women, and where does that kind of, what happened? Where do we sit in the journey? And yeah, it's kind of cool to think about creating the new history of beverages and how I think the next generation of drinkers, the newest generation of legal drinkers, are very different than you and I, and their relationship with alcohol is very different. They drink different, and they consume different, and what they how they approach recreation, how they approach relaxation is very different. And it's like we certainly feel like we're on the right side of history here in terms of introducing products designed for the next generation.
Yeah, I think you are too. I think you're right about that. And I love what you said too about the notion that we do have this myth sort of where alcohol, how deeply and how long ago it came in. But your point about the endocannabinoid system is well taken, because I was just speaking recently with a scientist who studied the relationship of the CB1 receptor that takes in THC and CBD, and this whole idea that we have in our bodies, in our brains, this system that's primed to take in cannabinoids. It as you say, it really does speak to kind of like, wow, how can you read into that anything other than cannabis has a deep purpose. And, then you can kind of get into the fun sides. I know I've heard people say things like, the burning bush that Moses was near might have been the acacia plant or acacia, how you ever pronounce it. But they say there are cannabinoids in there. And so it's like imagining that Moses came down with those stone tablets and maybe, was stoned when he did. I kind of like, sort of a myth like that, so to speak.
Well, I can't say that drinking a can of teapot will allow you to speak to God, but it certainly will open up your mind a little bit, and even just like American history, I think it was 1910, like the $10 bill or and then teens, like the $10 bill was printed on hemp.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Our founding fathers were hemp farmers. I think it's just it's very fascinating to think about kind of coming full circle, how quickly the history books can kind of erase cannabis and, through, just mid 20th century and the war on drugs. So, no, I think we're rebuilding the relationship that Americans have with cannabis. And it starts with individual conversations. It starts with accessible products that aren't, disruptive or offensive to other people. And Teapot as a low dose, fun, easy to understand, not complicated cannabis product is that type of product. It's designed to be not intimidating.
Let's talk about Teapot. It's a line of THC-infused iced teas, and it's specifically blending strains with different varieties of tea. So talk a little bit about the product itself and kind of the different flavors you guys are offering.
Yeah, the product is pretty simple. It's tea and it's pot. It's meant to, again, be very simple to understand. There's nothing complicated about it.
Right.
Teapot is low-dose cannabis iced tea. Our iced teas are 5 milligrams of THC, which is a modest amount of cannabis relative to most edibles that are out there. And it's designed to have no cannabis taste or aroma. And we choose specific types of tea to complement times of day. So we have black teas and green teas. We have a really awesome mango green tea that is designed for daytime consumption because there's a little bit of caffeine in that tea.
Ooh.
But we also have we have a blueberry chamomile. We have a really funky blackberry rooibos. These are evening teas that are designed to calm you down. And you add 5 milligrams of THC, and the flavor profile is really balanced really well. The taste of cannabis and the taste of tea really combine quite well. These are great tasting beverages, whether it's daytime and you're looking for energy and uplifting, non-sleepy high to get you kind of enhance your day, or you're looking to wind down and end your day on a high note, as we like to say. We've got some really great tasting evening iced teas. So, Teapot is designed, again, to be a easy to understand, not intimidating cannabis product that you can take anywhere. And we've got, I'm looking at it right now, I know I'm not on camera, but we've got just a great lineup of daytime and nighttime teas. We even have a CBD iced tea with no THC, so you can have kind of relaxation without intoxication. Oh. And it's doing really well for us. We're the number one low-dose beverage in Canada. We're the number one edible in the province of Quebec. They love us in Quebec. And we're really just eagerly awaiting some federal clarity so that we can bring Teapot to the masses in America.
So obviously people can find these in stores around Canada. And as you said, you're waiting for some clarity to enter into the States. Is it available across all Canadian provinces? Is it anywhere people can get it?
Yeah, more or less. We are in about 1,500 dispensaries. I got to check my math. We might be up at 1,800 now. Dispensaries across the country, coast to coast. I think there's a few provinces that we aren't yet in, but for the most part, most Canadians can access Teapot, and it's doing really well for us. I think we're really happy with what we have on our hands. I think we have something really special. Meanwhile, we're still an American company, and all we do is design products to win in the American market, to bring it to the American audience. And as a longtime advocate for cannabis, as I'm sure you are, it's pretty cool to see cannabis being this kind of apolitical topic now that seems to have universal support across political spectrums, across age, across demographics. It does feel like there's a momentum towards people realizing cannabis is a force for good, and we're ready. We're ready to figure out how we can bring Teapot and kind of a mainstream cannabis message to America.
On that note, if people do want to go find it at a dispensary near them and are wondering where the nearest one to them that carries it is there like a website with a store locator they can go to find out immediately where?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. So our website is drinkteapot.com, and you can also find us on social media, various platforms at Drink Teapot. And there's an easy store finder where you can just type in your address, and we'll locate a few dispensaries in your neighborhood to buy Teapot.
DrinkTeapot.com, like you said, listener, and it's just spelled like regular TEA pot, POT.com. And that's wonderful, makes it easy for people to find. And let me ask you, Paul, you're dealing with this with a beverage here, and we are kind of in this weird in between right now. I say this on the show all the time about how each state in the U.S. is currently like its own island in terms of cannabis laws, because federally it's restricted and it's only left up to the states to be able to do it. So you can't go across state lines. If you go to if you drive to Michigan from Illinois, like people I know do, and then they've got to bring it back here across Indiana, which is a no-go zone. Same with Wisconsin. You can run into some problems that way. And so I just want to ask you, what has it been like trying to kind of get Teapot into U.S. states, and how, are you guys able with THC and CBD? I know it's is this a hemp-based beverage, and is it covered under the Farm Bill? I'm just kind of curious how it goes with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, these are loaded questions, but important questions. Right? Like, I think that at the end of the day, like we have a great recipe and a lineup of recipes with Teapot that's made with Delta-9 THC in Canada, but we derive that Delta-9 THC from marijuana plants in Canada. How we would extract and source THC Delta-9 in America creates two different questions. Is it hemp-based, or would that be marijuana-based? And how does that regulatory environment unfold for us? As you mentioned, with the hemp side of things, where hemp has a platform to be legalized under the Farm Bill, the current 2018 Farm Bill, which is starting to get pretty old.
Yes. Yep.
There are people that are selling hemp-based THC beverages in liquor stores and selling them across state lines to tremendous success.
Yes, they do.
Because, again, when you put these beverages in the context of buying alcohol, when you're putting them in the periphery of a beverage alcohol buyer, like in the state of Minnesota, for example, it is not just an intriguing product, but it's a highly lucrative category that sells a lot. And what we're seeing in the state of Minnesota, for example, is a category that's roughly the size of the craft beer segment.
Wow.
Making up 10+% of retailers, of liquor store sales now. And that type of commercial success makes it kind of hard to ignore, or kind of hard to put the genie back in the bottle, as they say. So we'll see. We'll see how the next wave of regulations unfold. We'll see how things play out after the election, and how regulators at the federal level choose to address or continue to look away from the hemp category. Meanwhile, the marijuana category, which is very, like you said, very state-specific, struggles with scale. It really does struggle to get the necessary critical mass needed, because you can't get interstate commerce. So how does that work, and how do we get the scale necessary, particularly for beverages, where beverages really do need scale to maximize cost efficiencies and get the necessary volumes that you need? So two very different roads for how we would potentially commercialize Teapot in America. And it really depends on how we source our THC Delta-9. Hemp, selling in liquor stores, or marijuana, which has some state-specific regulations that we'd have to adhere to. But again, like, just feeling like we have a great product that has the ability to be commercialized under any of those scenarios, and just keep building our success here in Canada, getting it tight. One of the things we're learning is like how to manufacture at scale, how to, little things like how to win at retail and display the product properly, how to sample properly, how to find the right type of retail partners. Like, these are all things that we're doing every day in Canada as we continue to build and refine Teapot. So who knows? But the nice thing is it's a product line that's built for success in any of those scenarios.
Yeah, well said. And I think there's a lot of good points that you made in there, and one of which is the notion of the success of these hemp-based beverages in states like Minnesota and here in Illinois. I got to say, I've been seeing certain THC seltzers pop up all over the place. I even saw one at like a supermarket, a sort of ethnic supermarket that, like, I had no expectations to see anything like that in like the coolers, and there it was. And so your point about the market size of it, or currently in Minnesota, you guys have seen it roughly at the size of the craft beer market. That really does show the desire of another option. You mentioned earlier in our talk about the younger generation, Gen Z, if you like, Gen Alpha, when they come of age. These next generations have a very different relationship with alcohol. They have a different way of socializing, and that change, that paradigm shift, cannabis has a place for it, and or it has a place in that. And then, the states looking at that revenue, the market that you just talked about, the fact that it's at that place already in Minnesota when federally there's still all these roadblocks and obstacles. And I know, I'm the other states that also have greenlit cannabis and will allow for these products to be on shelves. That revenue and the potential for it is ultimately a large part of the equation as to why, I've always said that the politicians who are making these choices, if the way they legalize is or just reschedule is to get the federal government out of the way, I'm hard pressed to see any states that would say no to it just simply from the new tax revenue. It feels like eventually they'd be foolish to stay out of that party. Everybody wants new tax dollars, and cannabis definitely has a lot of potential there. But, the notion of alcohol companies being in the space and operating, you said something fascinating too, which is that you guys specifically are kind of going through important trial and error right now in Canada. You guys are experimenting. You're figuring out what's working in terms of distribution, retail space, getting it out to the right people, and kind of getting your brand to stand out. And obviously, Boston Beer Company, wildly successful from the alcohol space. And there are going to be some other alcohol companies, some big ones, I'm sure, eventually down the line that try and get into this too. If you can quantify it, because I know that you've been kind of in this space for a while, do you feel that alcohol companies maybe are better positioned to specifically tackle cannabis beverages as they do expand into states across America?
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a hard
Fair.
yes.
Yeah, I get it.
And I think for a couple reasons. One, it's really hard. Making cannabis beverages is a very, very technically challenging process. It took us maybe 5 or 6 years to just feel that we have stable, consistent inputs that we can play with. If you and I were having this conversation a few years ago, Don, it would be like, we wouldn't be talking about it as a taste. It would just be like, does it exist? Can we make a stable product that's going to hold THC, that's going to be able to be produced at scale without kind of falling apart or losing potency? All that stuff we've gone past. And and our team is, calm waters don't make competent sailors, and we've got a lot of competent sailors in the cannabis drink space now after years and years of collective wisdom. And then the beverage alcohol space is they're just so efficient at manufacturing and moving liquid. Drinks are heavy. If you want to move pre-rolls, you want to move vape carts, that's a lot of value for a very little weight. Right. A lot of value for a little footprint. But beverages are heavy. They are cumbersome. They take up a lot of space, and it's the beverage infrastructure, from trucks to canning lines to shelving and just the back braces, all that stuff that beverage alcohol industry pros have figured out over 100 years post-prohibition. That's the industry that's built for success for moving drinks, and I would suspect they're the ones that are going to succeed in whatever the new reality looks like. No, you're so right, man, and I'm glad you made that point, because there was 4 years from 18 to 21 for me that I worked in a beverage distribution warehouse, and it was Miller, mostly Miller products, but we had Sam Adams in there, we had a lot of different stuff, and the physical toll, the weight that you talk about of moving these things, loading them up on trucks, getting the products wrapped up so they could survive the journey, stocking store shelves. All of that is a very real calculation of getting these products to the places where people can consume them all around different countries around the world, especially Canada and the U.S. with the different provinces and states you got to go through there. So that is a real kind of equation. That's a real kind of mathematical calculation that you do have to deal with. And as you said, the alcohol industry has really gotten the hang of that. They know how to do that since Prohibition. And so you really can't put too much of a value on that, because it's a huge piece of the puzzle
of just getting these drinks to people where they'll consume them. Whether that's at the bar, whether it's just buying a 6-pack from the grocery store or stocking a cooler, outside somebody's, backyard barbecue or whatever it is. And man, I can't tell you how excited I am to start seeing teapot beverages at some of those events like I'm talking about here, because some of those flavors you mentioned, man, really just fascinate me. And being able to have some black tea in the morning and then some chamomile later on, all with a little bit of the fun layer buzz of THC. You guys are doing something really cool, and I just want to wish you the best, because I think everyone's going to be excited to try them just like I am.
Yeah, well, no, we're ready, Don, and I think Illinois is right across the border here. It's not too far from Canada, so it's certainly an exciting opportunity for us. I think the idea of Boston Beer Company, we've been around for 40 years, and our brands are special to us. But Twisted Tea, for example, which is a top 10 beer in America. The number, I think it is the number 10 or number 9 beer in America.
Wow.
That took 20 years to achieve, though. And I think it's a company. Boston Beer Company is a company that believes in its products, its liquid, and the fact that the right drink made an honest way will find its own success, and that's what we're banking on with Teapot. Is let's refine something really special and then allow it to find its own fan base.
Wish you all the success and can't wait to try them. And listener, as we mentioned, you can head to drinkteapot.com and find out where the nearest store to you is currently if you are in Canada. And if you just want to get excited, whatever state in America you're in too, and look ahead to this, definitely check out some of their products there.
Well, and we don't ship Teapot to America, but we do ship our merch, Don. So we've got some great shirts and hats, a few items that help support cannabis conviction expungement here in Canada. So take a look. We've got some nice socially inspired merchandise that we sell on our website as well.
That's great. It's a great purpose, obviously great cause there, and just doing a small part to just continue this normalization fight that I talk about on the show all the time. Just trying little by little every single day to just kill that persistent stigma that we're all kind of dealing with. And beverages like Teapot are going to go a long way toward doing exactly that, seeing them on store shelves and in the cooler summertime. It's going to be wonderful. So, director and head of cannabis at the Boston Beer Company and the launcher of Teapot, as I'm giving you credit for, Paul Weaver. Really appreciate you stopping by and sharing your perspective today. And like I said, man, keep up the great work, because this is something that people are going to love.
No, my pleasure, John. Thanks for having me.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time, I guess, Paul Weaver of the Boston Beer Company. A lot of good stuff in there. And as I was telling you when I reviewed Teapot, I definitely want to try their other versions of it. I would like to give a shot to some of those other cannabinoids. I think beverages, as we discussed, very exciting. I love seeing innovation in those spaces. If they can get down to a lower sugar amount, I think they'd have a home run here. And I think they're already a long way to that with the other versions of Teapot, like the daytime, the nighttime, the CBD only, those versions Paul and I discussed. You can check those out and learn more at their website that we discussed. But for now, I want to move on to some national news stories, and let's start with that one from Ohio that I talked about. There is a suburban Cincinnati farmers market where Ohioans are picking up cannabis plants to grow at home. This is Horsepower Farm. That's the name of the marketplace. And as soon as visitors walk in the main door, you get hit with that earthy smell of cannabis. This is on Cincinnati.com, The Inquirer, published by Randy Tucker. Earlier today, on the 12th, more than 30 vendors, says Randy, are setting up stands and selling everything related to cannabis, from LED lights, other grow equipment, to seeds, immature plants, and clones. And if you don't know, clones are cuttings taken from mother plants and developed into adult plants. Growing cannabis at home became legal for Ohio adults in December of 2023. So this is still very new for them, and now already you've got this farmer's market that's making it very easy for people to get started growing at home. There are pictures here, including one of a 58-year-old man, not, outing his age or anything for any other reason than, there are people who are a little older getting started and not afraid to maybe start something as intimidating as growing at home. Some of the experts offer guidance for cultivation. And the cool thing is that this farmer's market, the host donates proceeds to charity. The owner of Horsepower, Rick Opie Willis, said he was excited to see such a large turnout for the market. It cost $20 for general admission, and more than 1,000 attended the event at his 26-acre farm. Well done, Willis. I love it. Willis declined to give specifics in terms of figures. He did say that it makes so much money, that's a quote, that we can give away. He said the proceeds from the market would likely go to the Matt Haverkamp Foundation, which supplies police dogs to local agencies. Willis notes it's the second time he's done this. First time was June of 2024, and he said he had no idea what to expect. And they ended up with 60 or 70 vendors last year with more than 1,000 people in the parking lot. So I've linked this article below. Feel free to read the rest. There's plenty more there, but I wanted to give you that headline. Another headline that I think is worth you knowing about. There is a Fresno dispensary giving away free cannabis to medical patients monthly. And this is from KSEE 24 in Fresno. This was published earlier this week on the 11th, and it talks about a bill aiming to help low-income medical patients. It's a 2.5-minute video. I have linked this below as well. You can click on it and watch that for yourself. Over to a different state west of here, Montana, where a Republican lawmaker, is calling for state surveillance of consumers' retail cannabis purchases. This is from an article published by NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and it has to do with Senate Bill 255, seeking to significantly amend the state's voter-initiated adult use legalization law. Provisions in the proposed bill would mandate those aged 21 and up to pay a $200 annual registration fee with the State Department of Revenue in order to legally make marijuana purchases. Nearly 60% of Montanans approved legalization in 2020. Retail sales began January 1st, 2022. No other adult use state imposes consumers to participate in a state registry. Bad idea, Montana. That's all I'll tell you with this. $200 a year just to be able to buy cannabis? Not a fan of that. You know what you're going to do? You're going to spring that black market right back up if it's not already thriving, and people are going to be growing from home. That's what you're going to be doing with that. You're going to lampoon your state marketplace of legal sales. That's my opinion on this. NORML's deputy director, who I have interviewed on this show a few times, Paul Armentano, good friend of the show, really love having conversations with him. He denounced the proposal, saying this legislation is anti-freedom, unnecessarily jeopardizes Montanans' personal privacy, and seeks to fundamentally undermine the will of the 57% of voters who decided at the ballot box to legalize the adult use cannabis market. End quote. Totally agree with that. I just think, as he said, it's anti-freedom. It's bad idea for a lot of different reasons. And the article from NORML goes on to list a few of those. That was published last week on the 7th. I've linked it below as well. But finally, ending on a happy note here, or at least something I think is happy because I'm a bit of a history nerd, I suppose. It's something that I do enjoy, knowing about, what came before, where our past and where we've been. It can sort of help inform decisions about our future. But I digress. That's not why you're listening to this, I would imagine. Archaeologists, though, found that people smoked high-potency cannabis at funerals 2,500 years ago. This story published 3 days ago on MSN.com. I've linked it. Story by Natasha Ishak. I hope I'm saying that right. Probably not. Archaeologists found traces of cannabis at an ancient burial ground in Central Asia. A new discovery suggests people have been smoking pot since at least 2,500 years ago. As reported by The Guardian, a group of researchers found traces of highly potent cannabis at an ancient burial ground in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia called Jirzankal Cemetery. Again, apologies for likely butchering that name. The cannabis residue, I'm not opposed to smoking residue. If I were in that group of researchers, I definitely would have pinched off a little bit just to see if the weed from 2,500 years ago still had any kick to it. Not safe. I don't advocate for that. I'm sure it was moldy. It's dusty bone residue and other crap that's just in there. We don't need it, okay? Hop on over to Thailand. Hop on over to a local place, relatively local. Hop to an island that's selling it normally, or just, find a black market there and just do the right thing. Do your body a little better service than that. So I changed my mind on that. I would not do it, but I would have been tempted if I were in that group. That is no doubt. But it was found in incense burners on the cemetery grounds, dating back to the 5th century BC, making it the earliest directly dated and scientifically verified evidence for ritual cannabis smoking. Quote here from one of the archaeologists at the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. Quote, "To our excitement, we identified the biomarkers of cannabis, notably chemicals related to the psychoactive properties of the plant." That's from the lead researcher on the study. I have linked it below. I'll let you read the rest of it, hopefully drive a little traffic to these MSN articles and to the other ones that I referenced. I want to thank everybody who allows me to use these news sources because it definitely helps with content for the show. But how about that? I mean, there's always this debate in the space about how long this has been going on. Even Paul and I were speculating about it earlier in this episode. How far back does it go? Well, it goes back far enough that our bodies have a system to receive cannabinoids. That is definitely wild to consider. Now we have evidence at least 2,500 years ago showing high-potency cannabis was smoked at funerals. So really exciting stuff. Glad to be able to share all of that with you. And now, on what I feel is a relatively high note, let us end the episode, look forward to that hazy future together, and consider our past relatives all the way back 2,500 years ago enjoying this plant. So if you got something, pack it up, roll it up, spark it up, and let's gaze through the haze with a nice high haiku. Read by my friend Reg Kiefer. Take it away. Leaf and logger dance, each a joy in their own right. Room for both to shine. Yeah, man. That was haiku with the theme of alcohol and cannabis shining together. I'm guessing, right there, Don? Right, you are, Reg, and thanks for reading that as always. Thank you for putting up with that, listener, and checking in with the rest of this episode every week, hopefully, and getting a little news and perspective and just kind of keeping an eye, like me, on the cannabis space as this green frontier expands right before our very eyes. Thanks to Paul Weaver and the Boston Beer Company, makers of Teapot. Find out more about it. Shop for it if you're in Canada, and look forward to it if you're an American like me. Thank you to Jason Brown of Illinois News Joint. Thanks to Atomic Acres for inviting me to their industry event next week. I'll tell you how that went, listener, next we talk. And remember to leave a rating or review for this show, whichever platform you listen on. Subscribe for free to the Weekly Chronic at the link below. Get yourself a newsletter emailed to your inbox every Tuesday morning. Separate news stories from what I cover here on the podcast, along with bonus product reviews. You get the lit read, some of my additional perspective in written form. All of that's available to you below. Be sure to reach out to someone that you care about. Celebrate the good things in life, whether that be cannabis or something else that you like to do with somebody you like to be with. You'll never regret reaching out, making that text or phone call. Spending time with those is what adds up to a full life, and I hope yours is full of good things, and I look forward to sharing these good things with you here on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.